Hello, focused learners, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you with us because we're tackling a really critical, high-stakes topic today, one that lives right at the intersection of regulatory compliance and corporate transparency. We're going to unpack the specific SASB metrics dealing with internal controls on money laundering, specifically within the casinos and gaming sector. So whether you're an analyst, a compliance pro, or honestly, just someone fascinated by how massive financial risks actually get disclosed on a corporate ledger, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to look at exactly how gaming entities are required to report on their proactive policies, and crucially, how they must transparently disclose their failures and subsequent corrective actions.
Now, as we get going, we are drawing directly from the SASB standards for the casinos and gaming sector. Just a quick aside right off the bat, as of August 2022, the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is under the IFRS Foundation, actually assumed responsibility for these SASB standards. So we're looking at globally recognized, rigorous reporting frameworks that are designed to give investors crystal clear visibility into sustainability-related financial info.
Okay, let's dive into this. We have a brisk, highly structured two sides of the coin agenda today. 1. The high stakes of AML. 2. Disclosing policies and practices. 3. Proving policy effectiveness. 4. Tracking legal losses. 5. Detailing corrective actions. And finally, 6. The bottom line.
Section 1. The high stakes of AML. Vulnerabilities in gaming.
Look, to really understand these reporting metrics, we first have to understand the environment. The casino and gaming industry is characterized by intense regulatory oversight, which, fun fact, is actually the main barrier to entry for new operators. By the very nature of its business, the casino floor sees massive volumes of rapidly moving cash. Add in sprawling facilities and environments that sometimes allow for customer anonymity. And, well, you have a prime target for criminals trying to wash illicit funds. Imagine a high roller walking in with a duffel bag of cash. It's an extreme example, sure, but it highlights exactly why strict, robust internal controls aren't just a nice-to-have. They are an absolute necessity to prevent severe violations of money laundering regulations. A failure here? It can lead to criminal investigations, prosecutions, and some pretty staggering financial penalties.
Section 2. Disclosing policies and practices. Metric SV-CA-510a.1. And this brilliantly illustrates the proactive side of our coin. This metric requires a qualitative description of a company's anti-money laundering policies and practices. It lays out exactly what management practices entities are expected to disclose to mitigate those massive risks we just talked about. I mean, this isn't just about throwing up your hands and saying, hey, we have a policy. The standard requires specific details on how these risks are assessed and managed internally and even across the value chain with suppliers and contractors. Entities need to be describing practices like barring cash for cash exchanges above a set threshold. They have to detail their customer due diligence, things like patron identification, verification, and those absolutely vital Know Your Customer or KYC protocols. They also need to report on structural limits, right? Like enforcing caps on ticket in and ticket out redemptions at slot kiosks. Add in employee training programs, record keeping, and how they monitor transactions to catch red flags, and you've got a comprehensive narrative checklist.
Section 3. Proving policy effectiveness. Beyond the checklist.
Because, let's be real, having a list of policies on paper is one thing, but how do you prove it actually works? The SASB standard recognizes that policies are literally only as good as their execution. Entities have to describe the effectiveness of their programs and the associated outcomes. So how do they do that? Well, they can disclose third-party audits of the casino's overall program, which provides a nice independent stamp of approval. They can also use concrete, quantifiable data, like what's the total number of customers who actually underwent due diligence during the reporting period. Furthermore, they can report on the output, meaning the actual number and types of due diligence reports performed. Doing this turns a static, dusty policy document into a living, verifiable defense mechanism.
Let's move to the next step and see how this builds into the next crucial phase of our explainer. We've spent the first half looking at the proactive defenses, the narrative policies, the checklists, the internal controls. But what happens when those defenses fail? We have to shift gears from a qualitative discussion over to the reactive, quantitative financial ledger. Section 4. Tracking legal losses. Metric SV-CA-510a.2.
This is the reactive side of the coin. This metric requires the quantitative disclosure of the total amount of monetary losses as a result of legal proceedings tied to money laundering. But before we talk numbers, we really need to define our terms clearly. What exactly triggers a reportable monetary loss here? A legal proceeding is defined incredibly broadly. It includes any adjudicative proceeding involving the entity. It doesn't just mean a traditional trial in a courtroom with a judge and jury.
It includes proceedings before a regulator, an arbitrator, or otherwise. Basically, if the enforcement of applicable jurisdictional laws or regulations is involved, it falls right under this umbrella.
Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is just how meticulously SASB isolates these losses on the ledger. Let's take a look. Included as monetary losses are all actual liabilities to the opposing party or others. We're talking civil judgments or settlements, regulatory penalties, disgorgement, and criminal judgments or restitution. It captures the true penalty of the failure. But conversely, and this is super important, strictly excluded from this monetary loss figure are all legal fees and expenses incurred by the entity in its defense. This is a vital distinction. The metric is designed to show investors the direct financial penalty of the compliance failure itself, totally unclouded by the variable costs of a corporate legal defense team or internal investigations.
Section 5, detailing corrective actions. The aftermath.
Because a monetary fine is rarely the end of this story, right? Attached to this quantitative metric are critical reporting notes that essentially bridge the gap between a past failure and future prevention. The standard requires a very specific progression of reporting when a loss occurs. Step 1 is the legal incident and the monetary loss itself, which we just covered. Step 2 requires the entity to briefly describe the nature and context of that loss. Was it a judgment after a trial, a settlement, a guilty plea, a deferred prosecution agreement? And what was the actual context? Was it a failure of KYC protocols or maybe improper record keeping? Finally, step 3 is the mandatory disclosure of corrective actions implemented in response to the incident. You literally can't just pay the fine and walk away. You have to explain exactly how you are fixing the leak.
So, what does a corrective action actually look like in this context? The standard gives us some great concrete examples of what entities should be detailing to their investors. This might involve specific changes in daily operations. It could mean serious management restructuring. If oversight was found severely lacking at the top, it might require updated processes, changes in the business partners they work with, or significant upgrades to employee training and transaction monitoring technology. The whole goal here is complete transparency about the remedy, closing the loop right back to those proactive policies we discussed at the very beginning.
Section 6, the bottom line. Transparency as resilience.
We've walked through the intense vulnerabilities of the gaming sector. We've seen exactly how companies must disclose their proactive AML defenses and prove they're actually working. And we've seen how they have to rigorously account for their financial penalties and corrective actions when those defenses fall short. So the crucial point is this. Under the SASB framework, money laundering controls are not just some back-office compliance issue. They are a highly visible indicator of operational health right there on the financial ledger. Which leaves us with a final thought to reflect on as we wrap up this explainer. When you look at an entity's AML disclosures, are you just seeing a company checking a regulatory box? Or are you looking at a transparent organization actively proving its long-term corporate resilience to investors? Understanding the mechanics of these two metrics gives you the power to tell the difference. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep learning.